Hello again and welcome back to the channel. For this episode, I thought we would talk about the X32 and the M32 and DCAs. I imagine a lot of people are coming to the Behringer digital platform from things like the Allen and Heath GL3300, the Soundcraft Live 8, and the Mackie SR244 and the like. And if so, you're probably familiar with subgroups, but maybe not so much DCAs. Now, if you're coming to this from a large format console like a Yamaha PM4K or a Midas Heritage 3K, then this is likely old hat. A DCA is just a digital version of a VCA. But that said, Behringer recently introduced a DCA spill feature into their recent firmware upgrade, which does add some workflow options that you didn't need on those large format audio consoles. So we'll want to talk about that DCA spill function as we go along here. So to understand DCAs, let's first take a look at a subgroup. With a subgroup, you typically assign a group of channels to the subgroup instead of directly to the left and right outs. Normally, these are similar channels, like all of the drums or all of the vocals. Then, at the subgroup itself, you assign that subgroup to the main outs of the console. And if you're mixing in stereo, then you need a left and a right bus for your subgroup. You can also tap your subgroup for a matrix mix for an alternate output path. You might do this for a stream or for a broadcast mix. One popular option for a subgroup is to insert a compressor into the subgroup so that you can compress a group of channels as a whole. You're not limited to compression though. You could essentially insert anything into a subgroup, but compression is a popular example, and especially a vintage compressor emulation. So that's a quick summary of subgroups. Now let's focus on DCAs and what makes them different. The X32 gives us 8 DCAs. The 8 DCAs are always there, dedicated and ready. Subgroups we have to take away from our 16 buses, and for stereo, we need to take 2 of them. If you've got a lot of monitor mixes, and especially stereo monitor mixes like you might have for in-ear monitors, then you might be making some compromises somewhere due to the physical limitations of your buses. When you assign channels to a DCA, they don't run through a bus. That DCA fader is just telling the channel faders what to do. When you adjust the DCA fader, the channel faders aren't actually moving, but it would be the same thing as if they were. Their level is going up and down with that DCA fader. This all means there are a couple things to think about here. Number one, you only need one DCA even for stereo. Your channels are still assigned to the left and right outputs unless they're part of a group of channels also going to a subgroup. And your channel pans function the same as always. Number two, you can't put a compressor or anything else on a DCA because a DCA is just a control. It's not a bus that has audio passing through it. These two pieces of the puzzle should start opening some doors to workflow ideas. Anywhere you want to group channels together, mono or stereo, and don't need to put something like a compressor on that group of channels overall, then they can be assigned to a DCA. They don't need to go to a subgroup. And in the case of stereo, you only need one DCA. A stereo subgroup will require 2 of the board's buses. So, when you're able to use a DCA, you can free up 2 buses. The caveat to all of this being, unless you are using the subgroups to feed a matrix mix or its own output for something else. A DCA can't replace that because, like I said, it's just a control. No audio is passing through it. As long as you were just using your subgroups to control the overall mix level of a grouping of channels, then that's the perfect place for a DCA instead. We have to remember, our DCAs cannot have anything inserted in them, and they can't feed an alternate output. The DCA is just a control. The channels themselves are still in control of where their signal goes. As we consider these rules, we can start to think about workflow. We can think about where we have to use a subgroup and where we could actually use a DCA instead. And we can figure out ways we might be able to use the DCA to make our workflow more efficient. Our main need in subgroups is when we want to insert something into the subgroup, like a compressor, or when we need to use the subgroup to send an alternate mix somewhere, either via the matrices or the subgroup's own assigned output. One workflow use of DCAs that is developed in the digital world with consoles with multi-layered banks is to assign something to a DCA to always have it at the ready, no matter what layer your mixer is on. For example, your lead vocal could be assigned to a DCA by itself, or your lead guitar. That way, no matter what layer of channels you have called up, As long as your DCAs are called up in the master section, you have a quick fader to grab for those important channels. I like to put my vocal effects on a DCA for that very reason. No matter the console, the last DCA is usually my vocal effects. Another DCA use is to control stereo channels that get split across layers or fall on an even odd instead of an odd even channel, which you can't stereo link. But even if you can't link them normally, you can still assign them to one DCA and it's effectively the same thing, at least for level control. Sometimes it's just easier to use DCAs like this rather than to get into the soft patch menu. But as we start talking about using the DCAs for things like this as far as workflow goes, it's time we start to discuss the Behringer DCA Spill function that's been added. DCA Spill is a very simple concept, and once you understand it, you'll likely want to take advantage of it. Anything that you assign to a DCA will be spilled out onto the channels when you choose that DCA. You can almost think of this as a way to do custom layers. You don't have to assign channels to a DCA by similar groupings like vocals or drums. You can instead assign your most important channels to a DCA. Maybe that's your kick, your snare, your hat, plus the bass guitar, the keys, the lead guitar, and the vocals. Even something like your digital delay return. Really, whatever you could think of that would help your workflow if you could spill that out on one custom layer. That can all be assigned to a DCA. When you call up that DCA, when you select it, then those channels will spill out onto your channel faders. And yes, you can assign things to more than one DCA, and you can also assign channels that are also being sent to a subgroup to a DCA. A word of caution though, if you are going to intentionally assign things to more than one DCA for workflow reasons, just remember lowest level DCA wins. If you pull one DCA all the way off or mute it, then the other DCA won't matter. It can't override that. I kind of glossed over subgroups since we're mainly discussing DCAs in this video, but if you're wanting to know more about subgroups on the Behringer and Midas platform, I have a subgroups versus DCA video that I made for the XR series. The concepts and explanations easily translate to the X32 and the M32, so it should be helpful and easily understood. I'll leave a link right here on the left for that video. I will also leave a link up top to my video, 5 typical mistakes that Behringer X32 users make. It has tips that you can apply to any digital console to help you with your mixes. Alright, as always, please like and subscribe. Click the affiliate links to help support the channel. Leave me some comments and tell me how you use DCAs to help your workflow. And don't forget to give me video suggestions as well. That really does help me plan future video topics. Thanks for watching. I will see you next time.